The room went silent when my sister raised her glass at the family gala and called me our charity case, her words sharp under the glare of the chandeliers and the smell of too sweet bourbon. I'm Silas Merrick, 49, a former corporate controller, gripping my grandfather's brass pocket watch, its tick steady against the ballroom's hush. Ever had a night where one insult changed everything? What would you have done? The Merrick estate glowed like a lantern in the warm Denver twilight, the kind of place that made everyone feel small unless their name was stitched on the gate. The string lights draped across the patio cast long golden stripes on the brick, and the smoke from the grills curled into the fading summer sky. The scent of charred ribs and bourbon mingled with the laughter of 30 relatives, each one louder than the last. I stood near the edge of the patio, fingers curled around the edge of a sweating glass of water, trying to keep my face neutral while my sister's voice carried above the clinking of silverware. Delphine never needed a microphone. Her laugh was a performance in itself, lilting and sharp, like the pop of a champagne cork. "There he is, folks," she called, her voice slicing through the music like a knife. Denver's most elusive bachelor and part-time philosopher, my brother Silas. No paycheck, no portfolio anyone can see, but plenty of free time. Maybe he'll pour the drinks tonight, give him something to do. A ripple of polite laughter followed the kind people use when they aren't sure whether they should laugh, but don't want to be the only one not smiling. I didn't move, but I could feel 30 pairs of eyes flicker toward me, some curious, some pitying, most indifferent. Ephraim. Our father didn't even look at me. He just swirled the bourbon in his glass, the ice clinking lazily, and smirked like the scene amused him. "She's not wrong," he said, not even glancing my way. "A man without a paycheck is barely a man. Maybe you can help the servers, Silas. At least earn your dinner." His voice was low, but it carried the kind of tone he used to end arguments. The tick of my grandfather's old pocket watch felt louder than the music for a moment, its steady rhythm pressing against my chest like a hand. I pressed my palm against the fabric of my jacket, feeling its weight, that cool metal reminder that there were still things in this family worth holding on to. I didn't answer either of them. Instead, I straightened my posture and took a slow sip of water, feeling the cool liquid ease the heat that had risen to my face. The laughter and chatter moved on without me shifting to the next story, the next anecdote, leaving me as invisible as they preferred. When I finally set the glass down, Delphine drifted toward me, wineglass in hand, her diamond bracelet catching the patio lights as she twirled it for show. Still quiet, still brooding, she teased her words, dipped in mock sweetness. "Maybe you should auction off that little antique you're always clutching. Could fetch enough for a few months' rent." Before I could react, her hand darted toward my chest, nimble as always, and she plucked the pocket watch from my jacket. The chain caught briefly on the button, tugging at the fabric before it came free. She spun it on her finger, the brass catching the light gears, ticking faintly as it whirred around like a cheap party trick. "What is this, a relic? You keep it because it's worth something, or just because it's the only thing you didn't pawn?" The words were casual but deliberate, meant to amuse the onlookers, gathering behind her. I stayed still, my eyes on the arc of the watch, every turn of it making my chest tighten. When she finally tired of the game, she let it drop back into my open palm with a laugh, the weight landing with a soft, familiar thud. I closed my fingers around it and looked up, not at her, but beyond her shoulder. Across the yard, standing in the shadow of a cypress tree, was Corbin. He hadn't moved in some time. Hands tucked into his coat pockets, the faint glow from the string lights just brushing the edge of his weathered face. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. He didn't smile, didn't nod, right away, just watched as Delphine's laughter trailed off into the murmur of wine-fueled gossip. Then, with the slow certainty of someone who knows more than he's willing to say aloud, Corbin inclined his head once. The air felt cooler suddenly, as if the laughter and the bourbon-laced air had thinned. I slipped the watch back into my jacket, feeling the metal settle against my chest again. The music picked up a lazy jazz standard drifting from the speakers, but all I heard was the ticking, steady, insistent, like a quiet reminder that this night, this humiliation, was not the end of the story. I turned from the patio and walked toward the shadows, letting the sound of the party dull behind me, Corbin's nod lingering in my mind like a promise I hadn't yet made. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the radiator and the occasional tick from the old pocket watch on my desk. Outside, Denver's streets were dim beneath flickering streetlights, and snow had just begun to fall slow and deliberate, the flakes catching in the pale glow like drifting ash. I sat hunched over my laptop, the room lit by nothing but the screen and the orange cast of the lamp in the corner, scrolling through a folder named grainledger.pdf. Page after page of scanned invoices, tax forms, and ledger entries stared back at me. Their figures skewed, their signatures smudged where someone had tried to erase and rewrite the truth. I pinched the bridge of my nose, forcing my hands to steady. Each document felt like another nail in the coffin of the image my father, Ephraim Merrick, had worked so hard to maintain. The man liked to parade himself as a pillar of stability in the family, solid, dependable, a patriarch carved out of the same oak that framed his sprawling house. But the numbers told a different story. Funds meant for the pension plan lifelines, for the people who had built his company, with their hands rerouted into shell accounts. Not once or twice, but systematically, like he believed no one would ever bother to look. Maybe no one would except me. The radiator clunked, breaking the stillness, and I glanced at the photo beside my laptop. My grandfather stood in his clock shop in that picture, sleeves rolled up, hands blackened with oil and brass filings, smiling faintly at the camera. Behind him, rows of ticking clocks lined the walls like a chorus. I could almost smell the varnish and hear the layered symphony of seconds passing each tick, a quiet declaration that time didn't care for pride or facades. It just moved. Beside the frame, the pocket watch rested on its back, ticking softly, each sound echoing a little louder in the still apartment. I reached out and brushed a thumb across its smooth case, remembering how he used to wind it before bed, whispering, "Even a small thing can outlast us if we keep it tended." I scrolled to the last document in the folder, a ledger with entire rows of figures erased and retyped, the faint impression of the old numbers still visible beneath the digital ink. I highlighted the page, attached it to a draft email. The subject line was simple, unadorned pension fund diversion. Merrick Automotive. No embellishment, no flourish. Just fact, the kind that didn't need a speech to make people listen. The cold crept in from the drafty window, biting at my knuckles as I typed. I set the email to encrypt itself, addressed to both a journalist I trusted and an attorney whose replies had been nothing but terse and efficient. My cursor hovered over the scheduling option. The date was already locked in the night of the 2022 Family Gala, the one Ephraim and Delphine loved to make their stage. I adjusted the time, synced it to my phone, double-checked the attachments. My fingers trembled not from doubt, but from the enormity of knowing this one message could shift the ground beneath all of us. The streetlight outside flickered again, casting long shadows across the floor. I glanced once more at the photo on the desk, my grandfather's half-smile steady in the frame, the pocket watch ticking beside it like a metronome guiding me forward. I clicked confirm. A soft chime sounded, and the green checkmark glowed on the screen, sealing my decision. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the tiny icon, the faint hum of the radiator, and the rhythm of the watch filling the quiet. Then, a vibration against the wood of my desk broke the calm. My phone lit up the cold white glow cutting through the dim light. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. "One line Corbin wants to see you. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. The radiator hissed again, as if the room itself exhaled, and I looked from the phone to the watch, its tick unwavering. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing the streets in white. I leaned back in my chair, watching my breath curl faintly in the cold air, and let the message sit in my palm, knowing tomorrow might shift everything faster than the quiet tick beside me could count. The bell above the cafe door gave a tired chime as I stepped inside, brushing snow from my coat. The warmth hit me first, then the smell of freshly roasted beans, mingled with the faint tang of oiled wood, the kind of scent that clung to the walls of old places and made time feel slower. A jazz tune, something soft and meandering, crackled through the radio behind the counter, half drowned by the creak of the wooden floorboards as I crossed to the corner booth. Corbin was already there, his coat dusted with snow sleeves pushed up, as he cradled a chipped coffee cup in one hand. He slid the cup across the table toward me, the ceramic rough beneath my fingers, where the glaze had worn away. "Things break, Silas," he said, voice low, calm. "Most can be fixed." His other hand rested on the open pocket watch between us. Its gears and springs lay exposed like a patient mid-surgery, the brass glinting under the cafe's yellow lights. The steady movement of his tools made it feel less like he was repairing metal and more like he was coaxing something back to life. I wrapped my fingers around the chipped cup, feeling the heat seep into my hands, and watched as he inspected the tiny cogs. For a while we didn't speak. The only sounds were the muted jazz, the occasional creak of the floor when a patron moved, and the precise clicks of Corbin's tools as he tightened a spring. Outside the frosted window, snowflakes drifted down like ash, the world beyond blurred and quiet. Finally, Corbin looked up, eyes narrowing slightly as he gestured toward the manila folder on my side of the table. "You've done your homework," he said, voice dry but not unkind. "Invoices, tax forms, ledger, corrections. This isn't just sloppy accounting. It's deliberate." "They've been gutting the pension fund like it's a personal account, and I'd bet my last dollar Ephraim thinks no one's sharp enough to notice." I slid the folder closer to him, the papers inside, rustling as I pushed it across the wood. "It's everything I could gather without setting off alarms," I said quietly. My voice felt steadier than I expected, though a knot of tension sat deep in my chest. "I know it's not enough to bring them down, not yet, but it's a start." Corbin set his tools down, folded the folder open, and skimmed a few pages. The way his brow furrowed, it wasn't surprise. It was recognition, as though he'd seen this kind of scheme before 100 times. "It's enough to make them sweat," he murmured. "But sweat isn't collapse. Not yet." He glanced back at the watch, then at me, his lips twitching into the ghost of a smile. "Patience. Silas, precision wins wars, not brute force. You don't throw a stone, you pull the right thread and let the whole suit unravel on its own." The minute hand of the pocket watch trembled, then shifted with a soft, deliberate click. The sound was quiet, but in that booth it felt louder than the jazz, like the room had been waiting to exhale. I leaned closer, watching the tiny gears rotate each movement, sure and steady. Corbin didn't look at the watch. He looked at me.
See, it's been dormant, but it isn't dead.
Just needed the right hands, the right time. I took a sip of the coffee, bitter but grounding, and nodded. So we wait, I said, letting the warmth spread through me as I spoke the word. We gather more. Let them think I'm still the quiet failure in the corner. Corbin leaned back, stretching his arms along the back of the booth, his breath fogging faintly in the warm air.
Exactly, he said. You let them believe what they want until the moment it matters. And then...
He tapped the edge of the watch, its ticking now, steady and strong.
Then you don't just show up, you take the stage.
The radio crackled, shifting to a brighter jazz riff as the wind outside rattled the cafe's old windows. Corbin's eyes met mine, calm, but lit with something sharper beneath.
The gala isn't just their stage, Silas,
he said, his voice cutting through the soft music.
It's going to be yours.
The words hung between us, heavier than the snow piling up outside. I glanced down at the watch, its steady rhythm, a counterpoint to my own heartbeat, and felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not even resolve, but certainty. Outside, the snow kept falling, muffling the world, as the cafe's warmth and the faint ticking of brass filled the silence that followed his promise. The office smelled like machine oil and old coffee, a mix that clung to the air vents, no matter how often someone tried to mask it with cheap air freshener. The blinds were half closed, casting harsh stripes of light across the scuffed hardwood floor, the kind of light that made every imperfection stand out. I stood in front of the heavy oak desk papers, neatly stacked before me, my fingers resting against the cool edge of the wood as I tried to keep my breathing steady. Ephraim was pacing his polished shoes, scuffing against the boards, his face the color of overripe plums, veins standing out at his temples. "You'll never see a dime! Not a single cent if you pull this stunt!" he barked, his voice bouncing off the metal filing cabinets like a whip crack. "This family made you, Silas. You think you can drag us through the mud and still eat at our table? You're out of your mind!" His hand shot out toward the stack of documents, the ones meant to bury the pension fund scandal, to smooth over years of theft like a fresh coat of paint over rot. I didn't reach for them. My hands stayed where they were, flat against the desk. My face calm, though my pulse beat a quick, betraying rhythm in my throat. Delphine sat perched on the edge of a chair by the window arms, crossed her lips, curled into a smirk. She hadn't said much since I walked in, but her eyes tracked every move, savoring the scene. To her, this was theater me, playing the stubborn fool, our father, the indignant king, and she, the silent witness, confident. The ending would be just as it always had been. Me leaving humiliated. They leaving untouched. Ephraim's gaze swept the room until it landed on the chain at my jacket pocket. In 2 long strides, he was in front of me. His hand darted out, yanking the pocket watch free with a sharp tug, the chain snapping against the button of my coat. For a second, the watch glinted in the slanted light, its face still and silent, before he raised his arm and brought it down with a force that cracked through the room. The sound of shattering glass was sharper than his words, louder than the hum of the HVAC or the distant clatter of tools in the garage below. The watch bounced once on the floor before settling the fractured face, catching the sunlight in fractured shards. I froze, every muscle locked, the image of my grandfather winding that same watch, flashing unbidden into my mind.
Worthless trinket for a worthless man.
Ephraim spat, stepping back and brushing his hands together as if he'd rid himself of something foul. He turned on his heel, grabbed the top page of the draft contract I'd been expected to sign, and tore it clean down the middle. The sound of paper ripping filled the room, each tear deliberate as he shredded the entire stack and let the pieces scatter across the floor like confetti at a wake.
You want war, Silas, fine. But don't come crawling when the lawyers circle. You'll find out what it means to be on your own.
He stormed toward the door, the blinds rattling as it slammed behind him. For a moment, the only sounds were the hiss of the HVAC and the faint hum of machinery below. Delphine's smirk deepened as she uncrossed her arms and stood the faint click of her heels against the hardwood, punctuating her satisfaction. "You never learn," she murmured, brushing an invisible fleck of dust from her sleeve. "Some people just aren't cut out for this family." She didn't wait for a reply, simply followed Ephraim out her perfume, lingering like a final taunt. In the quiet that followed, I crouched and reached toward the broken watch, but another hand got there first. Corbin, leaning casually by the door frame, stooped and picked up the pieces. His expression didn't change, no flash of anger, no sympathy, just calm, deliberate focus as he turned the cracked face over in his palm. The faintest smile ghosted across his lips as he murmured, "It's not dead yet." I looked up at him, my chest tight, but my face still composed. "It's useless like this," I said, my voice lower than I intended.
Not useless,
he corrected, slipping the fragments into a soft cloth he pulled from his coat pocket.
Just waiting. Timing is everything, Silas. Let them think they've won. It'll make the turn all the sweeter.
The floor around us was littered with torn contracts, pale scraps stark against the dark boards. The HVAC hissed like a snake, the stripes of sunlight cutting across Corbin's face as he stepped closer. He pressed the cloth bundle, the broken watch, to my hand. His eyes, steady and unreadable, met mine. "We'll need this working by the gala," he said quietly. "Trust me." The cloth was warm from his hand, but the watch inside was cold, the shards pressing faintly against my palm, as if to remind me how fragile even the most enduring things can be. I closed my fingers around it and stood the room still heavy with oil coffee and the faint echo of my father's fury. Outside, the sounds of the garage rose and fell indifferent as Corbin pushed the door open and let in a slice of cooler air. I followed him out, the broken watch resting in my pocket, like a weight I wasn't ready to let go of, the faint promise in his voice, the only thing keeping it from feeling like an ending. The chandeliers blazed above the Merrick Estate ballroom, their crystal prisms scattering light across polished wood floors and mirrored walls. The scent of roasted meats mingled with the faint tang of wax polish, and the hum of polite conversation dulled beneath the lazy swing of a jazz trio tucked into the far corner. I stood near one of the towering windows, fingers brushing against the inside of my jacket, where the broken pocket watch rested, its tick uneven, stuttering in time with the beat of my pulse. The gala was in full motion, Ephraim holding court near the podium, Delphine swirling her glass like a queen, anointing her subjects, and 100 eyes politely glancing my way, none of them lingering for long. Delphine's voice, sharp and buoyant, sliced through the warm air. She stepped onto the small dais, lifting her glass as the crowd's murmur quieted. A toast, she began, her smile wide and gleaming beneath the chandelier light. To family, to success, and to perseverance, even for those of us who, well, haven't quite found our stride yet. Her eyes flicked to me, the briefest glint of mischief before she delivered the knife. Here's to my brother Silas, always our charity case. Our little clock that's run out but still manages to tick along somehow. Let's all drink to that. A ripple of chuckles spread through the guests, not loud but sharp enough to cut. Ephraim didn't even flinch. He stood with his bourbon, the picture of satisfaction nodding, as if the words were well earned. My face stayed still, my body anchored. Only my hand moved, pressing against the inside of my jacket, where the fractured watch's irregular rhythm tapped against my ribs, a strange metronome counting down. I felt the phone in the same pocket buzz a brief vibration that broke through the muffled jazz. Seconds. I raised my eyes and let them drift over the room, the golden chandeliers, the guests swirling their drinks, the glow of screens, as a few checked the time or their messages. Delphine tilted her glass toward me in mock salute, savoring the attention. The buzz from my phone came again this time, a double pulse, the signal I'd been waiting on for nearly 2 years. I didn't move, not outwardly, but a slow breath filled my lungs as I thought of the folder, the ledger scans, the invoices, the tax forms, all encrypted, all time-stamped, all now landing in inboxes that would not be ignored. The music faltered, not from the band, they still played their instruments steady, but from the shift in the room. Screens lit up around the guests, like a sudden constellation, faces turning pale as alerts flashed across displays. Whispers swelled, rising above the muted trumpet, each murmur feeding another. A man near the back, his tie slightly loosened, frowned at his phone before glancing sharply at Ephraim. "Is this true?" I heard him whisper to his companion. "Pension funds. Missing." Delphine's smile faltered just enough to show a hairline crack as she glanced at her husband, who was already scrolling through his notifications. Ephraim's hand tightened on his bourbon glass, his knuckles pale, but he stayed rooted near the podium, his jaw set as he scanned the room for some explanation, some point of control. Corbin, by the exit, shifted his stance, folding his arms as if to say this was exactly how it was supposed to unfold. A flash from a camera broke the tension like a lightning strike. A local reporter, one of the invited guests, had stepped forward, her voice steady and clear over the spreading whispers. "Mr. Merrick," she called, all polite professionalism with a sharpened edge. "Would you like to comment on the reports circulating tonight about diverted pension funds from Merrick Automotive?" The room hushed the jazz trio, faltering to a stop as every eye turned toward Ephraim. The silence was thick enough to feel broken only by the faint squeak of shoes on polished wood as a few guests shifted uncomfortably. Ephraim's mouth opened-closed, then opened again. No words came. The light from a phone screen reflected off the beads of sweat gathering on his forehead, making him look smaller beneath the chandelier's glow. Delphine set her glass down, her manicured fingers tightening around the stem before releasing it, her eyes darting between him and me as if hunting for an escape hatch. I didn't move closer, didn't step into the spotlight. Instead, I closed my hand around the cracked pocket watch, feeling the uneven tick stumble, skip, and resume each irregular beat like a countdown. The tension in the room hung taut as a drawn wire, the scent of polish, and the lingering smoke of roasted meat thick in my lungs. Across the ballroom, the reporter raised her phone, the tiny red light of a recording app blinking to life. Ephraim stumbled back from the podium, his heel catching on the polished floor. The bourbon in his glass sloshed a dark stain, splattering his cuff. His face, usually a mask of control, was drained of color, the shadows under the chandelier deepening the lines around his mouth. I let my thumb trace the fractured face of the watch in my pocket, the faint tick-tick-tick, uneven but insistent, a reminder that the night wasn't over, not by a long shot. The whispers grew again louder now, their threads weaving into something close to panic. I drew a slow breath and fixed my eyes not on Ephraim or Delphine, but on the shimmering chandeliers above their light cold and bright, as the weight of what had just begun settled over the room. The watch kept ticking, stubborn and broken, counting down to whatever came next. The chandeliers above the Merrick ballroom had dimmed to a soft amber, their glow no longer casting warmth, but something closer to scrutiny. The hum of the guests had dulled to murmurs, pockets of quiet conversations, stitched together by the faint static from the jazz trio's microphone. Delphine stood near the podium, her once perfect composure unraveling at the edges. She raised her glass halfway, lips parted, as if a speech might save her, but the words never came. The room wasn't listening anymore. That was when I felt the weight of something familiar slip into my palm. Corbin had stepped beside me, silent as ever, his coat brushing lightly against my sleeve. The pocket watch was cool but solid, its surface smooth glass face, flawless, ticking with a rhythm so steady it seemed to drown out every other sound in the room. Its beat was calm, unhurried, each second anchoring me. In his other hand, a flash drive glinted beneath the chandelier light before he passed it across his fingers, barely grazing mine. No words were needed. The weight of the two objects told me everything. This was the moment the tide turned. I walked toward the microphone, the guests instinctively parting like a slow ripple. Each step felt deliberate, my shoes whispering across the polished wood. The static from the mic buzzed as I adjusted it, a soft crackle that drew every eye. I didn't need to clear my throat or raise my voice. I let the steady tick of the watch in my hand ground me, the sound almost deafening in my head as I spoke. My name, I said evenly, is Silas Merrick. Some of you know me only as the brother who never quite fit the son who never quite measured up. And that's fine. I don't care to rewrite your memories tonight. I just want to make something clear. The hush deepened, a single cough echoing from the back of the room before dying out. While my family assumed I was content to drift, I was building, quietly, investing, creating. And as of this evening, my net worth sits just over $30 million. There was a pause long enough for the weight of the words to settle like dust after a storm. The ticking of the watch seemed louder now, syncing with the faint thump of the bass from the trio. Corbin handed me the flash drive without ceremony, the plastic cold against my fingers. And unlike what's been done with Merrick Automotive's pension fund, I continued voice, still calm. I intend to use a portion of that wealth to restore what was taken from the employees who kept this company alive. They deserve their future back, even if some of us tried to sell it off for short-term pride. Murmurs flared, hushed and urgent. Cameras were already raised, red lights blinking, as phones and camcorders captured every word. Ephraim sat slumped in a chair near the front row, his bourbon glass forgotten on the floor beside him, eyes darting not to me but toward the exits, as though calculating which path would draw the least attention. Corbin stepped forward, his voice low as he addressed the nearest journalists. This drive contains everything: Delphine's charitable foundation's tax filings, her payments to offshore accounts, her influencer sponsorships routed through Shellcore. He didn't need to raise his tone. The journalists were already leaning closer, phones aimed eager. The silence that followed was unlike the hush of politeness from earlier. It was thick electric, a collective inhale as the room processed. The only sound that carried clearly was the pocket watch, its ticking precise, each click as clean as a metronome. Then, from somewhere near the back, Delphine's husband blurted, 30 million! His voice cracked through the tension like a thrown stone echoing off the mirrored walls. Every camera pivoted toward Delphine, whose face had blanched, her polished poise splintered in a way no amount of makeup could conceal. The flash of a camera bulb caught the sheen of sweat at her temple as she tried to speak, but nothing came. I closed my fingers around the watch, feeling its rhythm steady my own heartbeat. I glanced toward Corbin, who met my gaze with the calm expression of someone who had seen storms break and pass. His voice was soft-pitched only for me, as the jazz trio shifted into a slow, somber tune, their notes curling gently into the corners of the room.
"Ready to leave this place behind?"
he asked. I looked around one last time, the dimmed chandeliers, the faces half curious, half condemning, the static hum of the speakers blending with the soft music. The watch ticked in my hand, steady and sure. Without another word, I stepped back from the podium, Corbin falling into stride beside me as we walked toward the exit, the muted murmur of the crowd swelling behind us. Each click of the watch's hands felt like a door, closing one after another, until only the sound of the music followed us out. The Denver skyline receded in the rearview mirror, its jagged edges softened by distance and the hazy glow of streetlights. Corbin's hands rested steady on the wheel, the faint hum of a late-night jazz station filling the silence between us. The air smelled faintly of autumn crisp, tinged with the faint sweetness of fallen leaves, and slipped in cool drafts through a cracked window. Each gust made the papers in my lap rustle softly, the thick contract folder heavy like a promise not yet spoken aloud. Between us on the dashboard, the pocket watch glinted beneath the passing strobes of streetlights, its polished brass catching each beam for just a second before releasing it back into the dark. Corbin's profile stayed calm, the corners of his mouth tipped in something close to a smile, though he kept his eyes fixed on the road.
"The fallout will take care of itself,"
he said, voice low, almost swallowed by the saxophone spilling through the speakers.
"Lawyers press board members. They'll circle fight settle. It's noise. You don't need to carry it with you anymore."
His knuckles tapped lightly on the steering wheel, keeping time with the music, a rhythm that seemed to align with the steady, dependable tick of the watch on the dash. I let my gaze drop back to the folder, my thumb brushing the edge of the brass clasp. Inside every page outlined a beginning I hadn't dared picture a year ago, the Merrick Arts and Community Fund. A gallery space converted from the old warehouse, a studio for local artists' after-school programs, for kids whose parents once turned wrenches at my father's company. My fingers found the watch, its warmth seeping into my palm, and I felt the weight of everything that had led here, every humiliation, every careful step, every thread pulled at the right moment. Corbin slowed as a neon sign washed the car interior in shifting blues and reds, the glow bending across his weathered face and the edges of the folder. "Clocks," he said quietly, almost as if to himself, "aren't for looking back.
They keep us moving forward, whether we're ready or not."
His words lingered in the space between the muted horn line of the song, settling into the hum of the tires on asphalt. I uncapped the pen, resting on the folder, its click sharp in the subdued car. As I signed, the scratch of ink across paper seemed to line up with the tick of the watch, each sound punctuating the other, a quiet duet of motion and intent. When I set the pen down, the contract felt different, not heavy, but anchored. Like the watch, it had a rhythm, now a life of its own. The radio's tune shifted the lazy saxophone, giving way to a brighter, more playful riff. Corbin's hand reached for the dial, turning the volume up just enough for the brass to fill the cabin without drowning the night. He cast me a sidelong glance, the faintest spark of amusement in his eyes, and murmured,
"Now we build."
Outside, the neon lights thinned as the road opened dark and wide. The pocket watch ticked on the dash, steady and sure, each beat a reminder that the night behind us was just that behind us, and something entirely new waited further down the road. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Merritt Community Arts Center, tracing long golden bars across the polished floorboards where children's footsteps echoed. Their laughter bounced off the high rafters, mingling with the soft hum of a jazz playlist drifting from hidden speakers. The air held the scent of fresh paint, mingled with a faint sweetness from the flowers planted just outside the open doors. The building, once the hollowed-out warehouse of my father's company, felt alive in a way it never had before. Above the entrance, encased in a simple glass frame, my grandfather's pocket watch hung as the center's emblem. Its faint, steady ticking carried across the open lobby, so soft you had to stop moving to hear it. People did, pausing in the doorway, tilting their heads, listening. The watch no longer felt like a burden or a symbol of survival. It was simply a reminder that some things endure, even when everything around them changes. I stood near the center of the hall, my voice quiet but clear, as I addressed the crowd of families, artists, and former employees who had come for the opening. "This space," I said, glancing toward Corbin, who leaned against a bench at the edge of the room with his arms crossed, "isn't just a new coat of paint on an old building. It's a start, a place to create, to learn to leave something better behind than the weight we carried here before." My words weren't rehearsed or dressed up. They didn't need to be. As the applause faded, a small girl, no more than 7, tugged at my sleeve. She tilted her head toward the glass case above the entrance. "Why is that clock so important?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the music. I crouched down so we were at eye level, her eyes reflecting the soft light streaming through the windows. Because I told her it kept running even when we thought it stopped. And sometimes that's all you need to know. Something is still moving forward. She tilted her ear toward the ticking, listening intently. After a moment, she smiled the kind of smile unspoiled by knowing too much. "It sounds happy now," she whispered. Then she ran off toward the cluster of other children, tracing their fingers along the fresh mural on the far wall. I lingered for a while, watching the space fill with motion and sound, the hum of life replacing the silence it had known for years. Then, as the afternoon light began to lean toward evening, I stepped outside. The air was warm, the city humming softly beyond the low hum of voices inside. The faint ticking of the watch, still audible through the open doors, followed me into the golden light. I breathed deeply, the sound receding, but not disappearing like a heartbeat I no longer needed to hold, but could still trust was there. The last light of the day caught the glass case above the center's doors, the pocket watch gleaming gently as its steady tick blended with the hum of voices inside. Watching the families and children explore, I felt a quiet certainty settle in. What was once a weight had become a reminder to keep moving forward. Sometimes bridges collapse, so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding, and sometimes what breaks can return stronger than before. For anyone weathering loss, betrayal, or a forced change, there's still a way to turn endings into beginnings. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Share your story or follow along here if you'd like to hear more like mine.